Greetings. Today I'm going to be talking about Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. My niece Crystal, who's brilliant by the way, and yeah, I'm telling you, she's brilliant. She asked me about 3 months ago if we could do a bi-weekly or maybe monthly chat regarding each of the books in Harry Potter. Then she said, well, I will probably need to have 8 of them because the last movie or the last book is actually 2 movies. I said, sure, let's do that. I love talking about Harry Potter. She knows that I watch every single movie 4 times a year, and I read times a year. It's like, then I do the book or vice versa. So she figures maybe I have enough time with it to have made up my own mind and figured out certain other things that maybe the book talks about, but it doesn't really explain it more. So what she did is she put together a list of 11 topics, 11 ideas for the first book that we were going to talk about. And it was really only supposed to be maybe around an hour or so, and it lasted 2 hours and 15 minutes. So it was fun. I had a good time with it. But I'm not long. It could still take 20, 25 minutes. I don't know. And I will probably list all the topics in the, once I got this and I upload it so that if you want to jump ahead, then you can. But this is where we're at. And she does do it in time. So it's not like she's going to ask me the last question first. We're going to keep that part in order. And here we go. So let's see what we got. So here's the first one, which is, why does Dumbledore decide to have Harry grow up with the Dursleys rather than with one of the wizard families? How does Harry's experience with his relatives build his character? Well, the first one is actually easy to answer because even Dumbledore says that. In his mind, he knows that Voldemort tried to kill Harry. He knows that Voldemort's got people who, even though Voldemort has now disappeared, there's still Death Eaters out there who might think, well, we got to go try to find Harry, and then we can kill him, and maybe we'll get Voldemort back. So the thing is that as long as Harry can stay in the house, or at least, with the family that he's with, he's totally protected. They can't touch him anywhere in the Muggle world. Maybe it's different in the wizard world, but in the Muggle world, they can't touch him. They can't get close to the house. They can't do anything to him. Like if he's just walking around downtown London, and he won't do that by himself, but still, he's got protection because he's got the family protection. So that's how come he stays with the Dursleys, worst family in the world. But then it says, how does Harry's experience with the relatives build his character? That's an interesting one because I'm not really sure. For instance, I don't know if I would have turned out to be like Harry. I mean, he was a small kid. Dudley was big. So Dudley always picked on him. Harry didn't know he was a wizard, so he didn't really fight back because Dudley was bigger. Dudley had his gang of friends at school, and they were all nasty kids and whatever, and they wanted to pick on Harry all the time. So therefore, Harry, like I said, he didn't know he had any special powers. He did seem to have ways where suddenly he was being attacked. Like one time when they were chasing him, he ended up on the roof of the school. And all those kinds of things, happened all the time. So, I think that the whole idea is that Dumbledore actually thought that they would treat him like they treat their son and that they would raise him properly. Dumbledore didn't pay attention to the Dursleys until he had to take Harry there. He didn't know that was going to happen, up front. So he never saw what the family was like until after Harry was living there. And at that point, his importance was to keep Harry safe and alive. So how it built his character? Like I said, probably if he'd been bigger than Dudley, he probably wouldn't have had that same character. If he'd been the same size, if he'd been able to make friends, because he couldn't make friends at school because Dudley wouldn't allow anybody to be his friend. So if he'd been able to make some friends, you never know if that would have changed. Anyway, that's question number one. Number two, why does it take so long for Harry's wand to choose him when he visits Diagon Alley? What is special about the wand? Why does Ollivander say the wand chooses the wizard? Okay, so let's talk about the first question. Why does it take so long? Because in the book, Ollivander goes nuts. He's just pulling out all kinds of wands and he's trying them with Harry. Sometimes he puts it in Harry's hand and he immediately takes it before Harry can do anything. It doesn't do that in the movie. The movie, he basically only looks at 2 wands before he gets one that suits him. What's so special about the wand is that they have the same core, and it happens to be Phoenix Feather. And it's the same thing that's in Voldemort's original wand. So that's what Ollivander says. And it turns out as soon as Harry left, Ollivander sent something to Dumbledore saying, hey, they got the same core in their wand. And, you know, Dumbledore knows that Ollivander knows what he's talking about. Dumbledore knows what's going on. They don't usually fight against each other having the same core. So that's why. Why does Ollivander say the wand chooses the wizard? Well, because that's usually how it kind of works. Every student who goes to Ollivander's to get a wand, he can usually read some of these people, some of the kids, but in essence, they try to do some things. Some of them, the first one works perfect, but he tries out kind of a different thing so that maybe the wand works better for them. It's kind of like we go to the store to buy shoes. Just because you put on the first pair of shoes does not mean those are going to be good. Even if they're the same size, they don't all fit properly. So that's what that's all about. Now, number 3, when Harry first meets Malfoy, he reminds him of Dudley. How are these two alike? How are they different? Well, in a weird way, this one's kind of easy also. Dudley was spoiled. Malfoy was spoiled. In the Muggle world, the Dursleys actually, they're not considered rich, but they're considered probably upper middle class. In the wizard family, Malfoy's family is rich. They're super rich. They're rich enough, it goes back, I think it's 3 centuries rich. As a matter of fact, the original Malfoys actually lived in with Muggles, and they interacted with them, and they were in their government, and they did all this other kind of stuff. And because they were able to, have money, they could change whatever they had for gold, and then got it into, Muggle society, whatever. They basically got away with almost anything until the wizarding, Wizenmire, whatever it's called, said, no, we can't keep interacting with them the same way because, then it's going to expose us. And then things changed. But they told everything. With Dudley, like I said, he was spoiled also. He got all the things. Remember the first movie, for instance, Harry didn't get anything for birthdays or holidays, but Dudley, he's, like I think he's a month older than Harry or something like that. So Dudley actually gets 36 presents. God, I would have loved having 36 presents, but there you go. Anyway, he gets 36 and he's mad because the previous year he got 37. So the family says, we'll buy you another present and we'll buy you one at the zoo. So now you can have 38. So that's, one of those kind of things. Malfoy could get anything he wanted. His family doted on him. Dudley was the exact same way. How are they different? Well, Malfoy's a wizard and Dudley's not. That's all I've got. Number 4, the Sorting Hat sings a song at the start of the banquet. So it says, what does it say about the members of the 4 houses at Hogwarts? And Harry thanks Not Slytherin when he's being sorted. What does this tell you about him? Well, the thing is that you learn about the houses actually from Hagrid. And Hagrid is telling Harry how, some wizarding families believe they're, pure blood. They're better than everybody else. How everybody gets sorted into their own house, and each house has its own the things that they're important in their lives. And so, this is the whole thing. Harry is told that all the bad people, including the man who tried to kill him, came from Slytherin. Now, in general terms, that's kind of a bad thing. I sat there trying to think every once in a while, did I ever do something like that? Did I just basically castigate an entire group of people because of how they acted or did something, whatever? And I said, actually, no, because I moved around, military kid. I lived in different places. I never ran into anything like that. So I know that I never did anything like that. But Hagrid was telling Harry about it. So now here's Harry. He's at the school. He didn't know what it was going to be. He didn't know it was going to be a hat. I don't even know that Malfoy knew it was going to be a hat, which is interesting. You'd have thought that every wizarding, family would have told their kids when they were going to school what they were going to be up against. Turns out, no. I mean, Neville didn't know there was going to be a hat. A lot of the other kids who were, the Muggleborn, you can understand how they wouldn't know. But anyone who lived in a wizarding house, you would have just assumed that they all knew it, but they didn't. So when Harry hears the hat tell him, I can see that you have the cunning and whatever, and you can be good in Slytherin, but you could also be good in Gryffindor because like bravery and whatever. And said, what do you think? What do I think? I got to think about this because the hat can take a really long time. They, call it the hat stall. Sometimes it can go 5 minutes. In the past, it could go as long as an hour. So, but of course in the movie, they're not going to have it go that long. But the hat says, I'm not sure what to do. And now Harry's like, wait a minute, no, I don't want to go to Slytherin. So he's saying, not Slytherin, not Slytherin. And then the hat says, oh, not Slytherin? Then we will go in a different direction. And the different direction is going to be Gryffindor because the hat mentioned that. And one of the differences between what happens in the book and the movie is that Harry doesn't talk out loud to the hat in the book. He does in the movie. So, Harry has heard good things from Hagrid about Gryffindor, and that's why he wanted to go there. Truthfully, I've always wondered if Hagrid had been talking about Hufflepuff, if Harry would have got up there and the hat still would have said, well, no, it's either going to be Slytherin or Gryffindor, or would he have said, how about Hufflepuff? Hufflepuff. Can I go Hufflepuff? I wonder if I was going to say that at some point. Hufflepuff. And then Harry said, can I go there? So I think that you get to have a choice, but Harry wanted to go to Gryffindor, and that's that. So number 5. Why do Harry and Ron dislike Hermione in the beginning? How does their friendship with her grow? What qualities and strengths does each of them bring to their adventures? Okay, I will say that the first question is kind of a misnomer. Harry didn't hate Hermione. Ron hated Hermione because in her own way, she was totally different than Ron. Her and Harry might have had some of the same things. She was Muggle-born. Harry lived with Muggles. And she was smart. She had read all the books. She already knew how to do certain spells. And, she wasn't told that she wasn't supposed to do any spells. But she did some. The family went and got the books. She consumed all this kind of stuff. But Ron, the books kind of did Ron bad. The movies really did Ron bad. But the books did Ron bad because they made him basically look kind of stupid. But he wasn't stupid. He just, he's got all these brothers. He's got one sister who's younger than him. So, he was kind of overlooked. I've seen that in my history where you've got these big families and there's always the one child who doesn't seem like they're getting any, anyone giving them any support because they had to deal with all these others. And now we got this one who's, a different sex. So I can see how that happens. I can see why Ron didn't like it because he was, like I said, he was treated as the dumb guy and stuff kept happening to Ron. We're not going to go into, book 2 or book 3 or anything else. We're going to stick with this one here. So that's that. How did their friendship grow? Well, because they were the only ones who basically went to try to help save Hermione or to protect her because, they had that Halloween thing where there's a troll on the loose. And Harry says, wait a minute. Hermione doesn't know. We've got to see if we can find her and see if she's going to be okay. And Ron's like, oh, okay, fine. And they did that. They went and they saved her. And she didn't tell Ron in the book about, Wingardium Leviosa. She didn't tell him that. She was too scared for anything. So Ron did the magic, saved her. She was thankful. Those are the kind of things where, okay, yes, this is how we're going to have our friendship grow. That's pretty cool. What qualities and strengths does each of them bring to the adventures? That one's a little weird. When you ask it like that, I will put it this way. Hermione knew all the knowledge stuff. She knew all the book stuff. But in general terms, she was not necessarily the brave one out of the entire group. If she could figure something out because she'd read the book, she would handle it. But otherwise, that was not her first thing. Ron, he knew more things regarding the wizarding world than either Hermione or Harry. And so even though he didn't get to practice a lot of magic, living in the family he did, although that's also something that was questioned on some other thing that I saw on YouTube a couple of years ago, because they said, if Ron had had some kind of wand, or if he had started doing magic when he was still at home, before he got the letter taking him to Hogwarts, who would have known? Because in wizarding law, they leave it up to the parents to train their kids how to do certain things. Or if their kids start doing magic, it's the parents who, may come up and say, well, no, you shouldn't be doing this because we need to hide. But, the Weasleys lived way out somewhere in, you called it the borough. I don't really know what a borough is, so I can't answer that question. But in essence, Ron could have done certain things. Ron, if you notice in the books as opposed to the movies, Ron knew a lot of stuff. He would hear stuff from his parents, his brothers. So he at least was knowledgeable about all these kinds of things. Harry basically was, as a young person, Harry is what probably all of us who ever read the books or saw the thing, had I been a lot younger, we would have said, that's the guy I want to be. I want to be the guy who, if someone is in trouble, I'm going to try to help. And that's all that is to it. And if I've got to, go against someone who might be a little bit more dangerous, you know what? I'm going to support my friends, and that's what I'm going to do. And in a weird way, I was like that as a kid, so I actually understand that part. Number 6, why does Dumbledore give Harry the Cloak of Invisibility? Why is the cloak so important to Harry? If you could become invisible, what would you do? Where would you go? The importance of the invisibility cloak is that it belonged to Harry. It came down through the generations. We learn in the 7th book that he's related to the Peverell brothers, and they're the ones who created the cloak and the stone and, oh God, why am I glitching here? Whatever the other one is, the Elder Wand. So the Peverell brothers are the ones who created all this stuff. It goes down into the family. Harry, turns out, he was the first. He wasn't like a full wizard. In other words, he was a half-blood. So everyone else was pure blood. He's the half-blood. That's just how that happened. But it's still the only family members. There's no other family members. It had to go to Harry. Dumbledore wasn't going to keep it. Dumbledore didn't need it. Dumbledore already knew how to become invisible whenever he wanted to. He didn't need a cloak. But I also think that it's possible that he knew Harry was going to try to do some things, and he wanted to see what he would do, so he gave him the invisibility cloak. So that actually, is the first part. The second part, why is it important to Harry? because it allows him to basically see certain things. Early on, for instance, he, figured out Snape. Okay, Snape is a blankety blank, but he didn't get Quirrell right. But Quirrell never knew early on that Harry had a cloak. I don't even know if he knew it by the end. So therefore, Harry got to, walk around and see things on his own. Yes, he was out of bed. He probably shouldn't have been doing that. But I could see if I'd had it and I had the opportunity, I would have done the same thing. So there you go. If you could become invisible, what would you do and where would you go? Nowhere. I like I said, maybe if I was at Hogwarts, it might be interesting to walk around and see what there is to see. In my regular life, I live by myself. I'm an only child. I did that anyway. I lived in Japan. I did that. When I lived in northern Maine, I would just, go off and walk on my own. When I lived in Kansas City, I didn't do that as often because I was living in the ghetto with, when my dad was in Vietnam, I had to live in a place. So I can't see me doing that there. But I have been known to just walk off, at least when I was younger. Don't have to anymore. So I don't have anywhere to go. It doesn't fit me at all. That's just me. So number 7, discuss the importance of the Mirror of Erised and the meaning of its name. Dumbledore tells Harry, it shows us nothing more or less than the deepest, most desperate desire of our hearts. However, this mirror will give us neither knowledge or truth. What does he mean by that? What would you see if you looked in the mirror? Okay. So the importance of the Mirror of Erised, anyone who's really paid attention realized Mirror of Erised is just the reverse of desire. So in essence, if you look in the mirror, you will see what you have always wanted. Harry wanted family. And so the first time he looks in the mirror, in the movie, he just sees his parents, but in the book, he sees all of the family members that goes back. And he doesn't know any of those people, but they all show up because he always wanted to see family. And so he does. That's why it's important to have that. It's important to have the mirror because one of those times he's able to get Ron to go with him. And Ron goes up there and Ron sees that he's, I think he was a prefect. He won the House Cup. So he was like this great Quidditch player because Ron, I think he's the 5th male in the family. And he was never given that opportunity to stand out in any way. And so this is his opportunity. So he sees, he looks good. He's got all these skills. He can do all this kind of stuff. He's better than his brothers in the mirror. So who wouldn't love that kind of thing? What would I do if I had the mirror to look in? Okay, it's going to sound really goofy, but as a kid, the only thing I really wanted to do was be able to fly. I wanted to be like Superman. I didn't want to necessarily beat everybody up, whatever, but I wanted to be able to fly. So you just go outside and jump up in the sky and just fly above everyone. We didn't know about invisibility cloaks back then, but I always wanted to be able to fly. I didn't need an airplane for it. I just wanted to be able to fly. You know, I still kind of a wish that I wish I'd had as a kid. Of course, nobody has that. Although these days you can get one of those, lifting things. I don't even know what they're called, where you can go flying around, whatever. I've seen that locally at the state fair. That's kind of cool, but no. Because if something happens, now you're going to fall. You may get yourself hurt really bad. You may even get yourself killed. Oh, I wanted to fly regular. And there you go. That's me. Number 8, Professor Quirrell tells Harry, there's no good and evil. There's only power, and those too weak to seek it. So then it says, discuss whether you agree or disagree with this statement. How do you see this idea at work in our own world? I disagree with that statement. There is good and evil. Power can help you if you're good, having power or authority, let's go with that word instead, gives you an opportunity to try to help other people, to do good. For instance, if I had, okay, I'll just say unlimited money because that's kind of goofy, but if I had unlimited money, I would help my certain area, my entire area, not just, the village I live in or the town I live in, but the entire area of central New York. We would have all kinds of things. And, you know, I think that would be wonderful. We would be a mecca. And, you know, okay, we did win a national championship in 2003, but overall, I would just do this for my community. My house would be a lot better, but I just think that I would love to have the money to take care of all kind of things. I would have been able to take care of my mother better. I would have been able to take care of my dad better. At least I would hope. I've always had one of those dreams that if I'd been really rich, I would have had a cancer center and a center that did something for Alzheimer's, hook it up with Upstate Hospital, which is, downtown Syracuse. I've always wanted that. That's why I wanted to be rich. Yeah, I want a lot of other things, but one of those things that you realize as you get a little older is that, you can only have so much. If I said, I want to have someone who cooks all my food and bakes me cakes all the time or whatever, okay, I think it's kind of boring after a while. You want to get out and do some other stuff. So I think being able to help others, I would love that. So that's just me. You don't necessarily need the power, but wealth, yes. Um, that's pretty much where I'm going to go with this. I think that it says, do you see this? How do you see this idea at work in our own world? Well, I'm going to use Taylor Swift as an example. She donates a lot of money to charity. Bruce Springsteen donates a lot of money to charity. There's a whole bunch of artists, music, movies, whatever, who donate money to specific charities. The thing is, you don't have all the money in the world, so you have to kind of pick and choose. But if I had the money, Central New York, people would be clamoring. We got to go to Syracuse. We got to go to Cicero. We got to go to Baldwinsville. We got to, hang out, you know. And of course, we got the state fair. So people come up here anyway. And I'd help out with the state fair. Maybe I'd be able to talk some people and give me some of those free donuts or the corn dogs. That's goofy, but why not, right? Okay. Number 9. Dumbledore tells Harry to always use the proper name for things. Fear of a name increases fear of the thing itself. What does he mean by that? Why is it important to name a thing that you fear? And I had to, truthfully, I can't remember what that alluded to. I really don't remember what it alluded to in the book. Like I said, I've read them all these times. I don't remember it in the movie, but it's something to think about. Fear of a name increases, the thing itself. And I think in a weird way, that could be true, but it could also be bad. In my opinion, I don't see anybody better than me. I don't see anybody worse than me. I know some people who may have a rough life that they've had to deal with, that they're still dealing with. And I know some people who've had a wonderful life and they love that. And as long as the people who are rich or powerful are not taking advantage of the people who don't have that, and as long as the people who don't have that aren't trying to steal from other people, or they don't care, they're going to go out and beat whoever they need to beat or do whatever to someone so that they can have food and, at least live a little bit. Although you find out that sometimes people do that kind of thing. They don't know how to plan their money or whatever, so they're going to do something stupid anyhow. But I think that at that point, you always need to be able to think about how you're going to live your life, how other people are going to live their lives. Truthfully, I don't trust anybody who's walking behind me unless I'm in a big area. So for instance, if I'm at the mall, I'm okay because there's a ton of people around. And if I'm probably anywhere else, no. Mm-mm. That's an only child thing maybe, but I lived in the ghetto in Kansas City. I never caught myself, walking down a hall and not knowing whether people were behind me enough. And I was only 10 years old. So that tells you something. Number 10. What explanation does Dumbledore give Harry for protection he received during Voldemort's attack when he was a baby? What does he mean when he says, to have been loved so deeply, even though the person you loved is gone, will give us some protection forever? How does this protection keep Harry safe even in the most difficult circumstances? Well, Dumbledore has always said, love is the most powerful kind of magic that there is. And when you think on it, his mother, Lily, gave her life so that Harry couldn't be killed by Voldemort. And Dumbledore even told him that. He said, she gave her life. She didn't have to do that, but she gave her life. Voldemort told her, get out of the way, whatever. She says, no, not Harry. Okay, I got to kill you because I got to kill him. And then he killed her. But because it's love, it ended up protecting Harry. Voldemort couldn't do anything to him. So Dumbledore says that. He says that in, I think it's the 4th or 5th book or something like that. Maybe he even mentions it in the first little, but he got into a little bit more detail later on. But that's interesting. That's a strong one, And, when you think about it, that's how come when he couldn't kill Harry, but he still broke off a part of his soul, which ended up going into Harry. That's something else that made Harry a little bit different. And it had to be Harry who had to kill Voldemort at the end. So how does that protection keep Harry safe? Well, you start to find out that there's things that happen from some of the other wizards. For instance, in the first book, Quirrell couldn't touch Harry because, Harry's got not only his mother's, love in him, but also he still got that Horcrux in him. So there was nothing they could do to Harry. It happened pretty much all the time. In the second book, in the third book, whatever, the fourth book, no one could really do much to Harry. They could tie him up. They could do all other kinds of things. Voldemort was able to touch Harry, but at the same time, Voldemort was feeling some of those same things. In Goblet of Fire, he was feeling some things, but he was trying to overcome it. He's got his boys there. He didn't want to look like a punk. So he, did that in, Goblet of Fire. So that's how it kind of protected, because of Lily giving up her life for him. Not that James didn't do it, but James wasn't up there with Harry to basically take the killing curse for Harry. So there you go. And now here's the last one. While finding their way to the Sorcerer's Stone, what strengths do Harry, Ron, and Hermione each contribute to solving the puzzles? Were you surprised when Quirrell, Squirrel, I want to call him Squirrel. Anyway, when Quirrell turned out to be the one who was after the Sorcerer's Stone, was there anything in the plot that led you to suspect him? And truthfully, there was nothing in the plot that led me to Quirrell. I didn't know that was coming. I read the books first, and then it's like, oh, whoa, no, I didn't know that. Now, in retrospect, when you go back and you start reading all the books, Quirrell's out there a lot. I mean, Snape is in there a lot, but Quirrell's in there a lot. And so you start thinking, it's got to be Snape. He's a blankety blank. I don't cuss, so he's a blankety blank. But Quirrell didn't see that coming at all. But then later on, you think about it, says, that kind of makes sense. Anything weird that happened, he was there, but unfortunately for everyone else, so was Snape. So, that's why it was a shock. What strengths do they contribute? Well, Hermione had the intelligence. So she was able to get them out of the devil's snare and she was able to figure certain other things out. But Ron actually had the courage. For instance, when they're in the devil's snare and Hermione says, well, I don't have wood to make a fire. And Ron says, are you crazy? Are you a witch or not? Just, oh, yeah. I mean, Ron had to calm her down. Yes, you're a witch. Do what you're supposed to do. That's kind of funny. Ron knew something about keys. So Ron is the one who figured that out. Ron knew how chess worked. Ron could always beat Harry at chess. Ron was very good at chess. I don't know how Ron got really good at chess. He could beat his family members. Maybe because that's, the thing that he concentrated on. He didn't have anything else. Wizards didn't have like kind of toys that most kids here have now. Kids may have had it in the 90s. I know he didn't have any toys like I had in the 60s and 70s. So, it's just one of those kind of things. I don't know. I don't think Jenny had toys specifically, but, he just saw her as a little sister. He didn't see her as another child that he could play with. At least it's not mentioned in any of the books. So I don't know. So yes, I was surprised about Quirrell. I never had any idea it was going to be him. Harry's strengths was courage. Courage. He knew he's going to save the family. He thinks it's Snape. He hates Snape. So he goes on with the thing. He finds out it's Quirrell. And then, can you just imagine? I don't know what anyone else would have thought. If this guy in front of you took off the turban and there's this face on the back of the head and it's talking to you and taunting you. I don't know if I would have screamed or whatever. I hoped I wouldn't have passed out. So I give Harry a lot of credit because that would have freaked the heck out of me. I'm not necessarily, one of those kind of people who likes to see all that kind of thing. But, that's me. Anyhow, here I am. I'm done. I've made it through all of those. It's way longer than I thought it was going to be. Sorry, but like I said, I'm putting in everything down below so that you can jump ahead if you want to. Timestamps. I'm going to put those timestamps in there. And, I hope that some of you like some of this. I hope I gave some answers. If you have some thoughts about some of these things I talked about that are different than mine, please share it. I don't mind people sharing. As a matter of fact, I've gone on some of the other people who are on YouTube who do Harry Potter stuff. And sometimes I go in and I say, hey, by the way, you missed this thing here. Or I will go on and I will say, yes, exactly. And it's because of this here. And I love this kind of thing. Harry Potter community online is good people for the most part. I'm not going to talk about the people I don't like. I don't even remember their names, so that works out well. Anyway, that's where I'm at. My name is Mitch Mitchell. I got my, infinite diversity, infinite combinations. If that's not a Harry Potter thing, even though it's from Star Trek, I don't know what is. Y'all take care. Have a wonderful day.